Bastard Iron. The world is changed. I feel it on my Steam account. I feel it in my fingers. I smell it in my GPU. I should do something about that. Many games that were are forgotten, for none now play who remember them. Everything began with a shopping cart that was empty, until it wasn't. A code was redeemed. The library grew and grew, and classics that should not have been forgotten were lost. History became legend, legend became myth, and for 10 years the Middle-earth games faded from memory, until today. You play as Talion, a ranger from the Black Gate of Mordor who gets massacred along with his wife and son by the Black Hand at the very start of the game, after a quick tutorial. He himself doesn't die though, and is possessed by a mysterious wraith that still has a score to settle with Sauron himself. They both decide to get revenge on the ones that wronged them, and the game jumps right into it without long hesitation. It is set between the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, just to give you a rough idea on where to put it in the Tolkien universe. There are even some known characters that appear, for example Gollum, who has already lost the ring, so it must take place after The Hobbit. The game starts so abruptly that I thought I missed some content because I'm used to slow introductions. And even though it's almost 12 years old now, I don't want to spoil a whole lot of story content. Except for the final boss fight, which is very apparent from the start, so you've been warned. Suffice it to say that it does not really go beyond the wife dead, revenge, Dark Lord, bad trope, and Talion is the perfectly pale protagonist to go along with it. He is a very typical, honorable good guy who cares for others and always wants to save everyone, while the Wraith has a more strategic, cold determination. It feels like they have no chemistry at all and their unity is just a means to an end. But compared to the story, the world delivers what it promises. It's nice to see more of Mordor and from a different angle. The graphics are very fitting. At first it is very dark and gritty, and the environment is hostile with mud and rocks being the main components of it. Death is ever present. That changes a bit later in the game when you, slight spoilers, reach the second area, which is much greener and nicer to look at. So, you start on a tower and right off the bat it becomes very apparent that the game is a child of its time and not in a positive way. I want to give you my honest thoughts, so I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I did not like it, even though I really wanted to, considering that I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan and the Middle-earth games are considered among the best licensed ones. Now, before you come at me with torches and pitchforks, hear me out. I will try and organize my thoughts in a way that makes them comprehensible. And then you can burn me at the stake. It has a very Ubisofty open world feel to it, which was the standard at the time, and the game in general feels like it could be an Assassin's Creed game. The world is not very big and it's filled to the brim with icons. You have your collectibles, towers that you can climb to remove the fog of war from your map, and challenges for every one of Talion's 3 weapons. There are the sword, the dagger, which is basically a broken sword and used for assassinations, and the wraith bow. Most of the challenges consist of killing a certain amount of enemies in a given time frame, and therein lies my first big issue. There are a lot of time limits, and that's incredibly annoying. I guess I don't have to explain why, but I'll do it anyways. First, it gives an unnecessary sense of urgency and artificial difficulty. For me, it's just a lazy way to make a gameplay section harder. And second, and probably more important, the gameplay feels incredibly clunky. Talion doesn't jump where you want him to, and he fights different enemies that he's supposed to. And before anyone mentions it, yes, I played it with keyboard and mouse, which to my surprise felt better than playing with a gamepad. Orcs can sometimes spot you through walls, which is wild considering there are many missions with forced stealth, which I have a personal vendetta against, or you simply get bonus XP for not raising the alarm. The mission design itself is pretty repetitive. It mostly consists of going somewhere, fighting a bunch of enemies, going to the next spot and fighting some more enemies. Sometimes even with companions that you have to keep an eye on, unless you want them to be ripped apart by Caragors, which is some sort of walk, I think. You could call some of them escort missions, even though they aren't necessarily, but don't you fret, you gotta help out injured friends down the line. You're not getting away without that. Gameplay-wise, there is technically a lot of sneaking around involved, but I'll be honest, I rarely relied solely on stealth, and sooner or later you're forced to fight anyways. The combat system is pretty solid when you're able to focus on the right enemies. Sure, there is a lot of button mashing, but it has its tweaks that make it exciting. It's very similar to the free-flow combat system of the Batman Arkham series, which is to say, it's the exact same thing. But with a sword, which makes sense, seeing as it is a Warner Bros. Games production, and I think I've read somewhere that it was supposed to be a Batman game at first, but I'm not sure. Speaking of Warner Bros., they shut down Monolith, the studio responsible for the Middle-earth games, which I'm gonna come back to later. I was still talking about the combat. The combat system makes enemies feel a bit spongy, and while the hits connect pretty well, it can feel a bit dissatisfying. Yet, there are executions and finishes that are absolutely brutal. The game in general is a very bloody business, and when your health is at 0, that doesn't mean you lost. There is a mechanic called Last Stand, where you can delay your defeat after receiving a fatal blow by solving a small quicktime event. Which leads me to my next point of criticism. Quicktime events, or QTEs. I hate them, and I don't know a single person who likes them, and if you do, who hurt you? And the Middle-earth games have tons of them, including Shadow of Mordor's final boss. I can imagine that it's hard to design a compelling boss fight, especially in an open world game where different players finish the game on different character levels. Other studios struggle to do that regularly. But this? Come on, that's just lazy boss design. And it's not just him. The boss before him is just as bad. Boss fights. They are a staple of gaming culture. The ultimate test of the player's skill and the last obstacle on their path to glory. But sometimes, sometimes the developers just drop the ball. And this is what this award is for. And the award for worst final boss fight in a video game goes to the Black Hand Shadow of Mordor. I'm not a game designer, so I wouldn't dare say that I could do better, but a professional developer should be capable. But the main appeal and reason why many consider those games as absolute classics is the Nemesis system, and I can't blame them. It is pretty great to have an enemy army with infighting and ranks they can climb up, just for you to interrupt and later in the game to infiltrate with your own orc warriors. It's incredibly fun. It also shows the quarrels between the enemy captains and their strengths and weaknesses, which you have to keep in mind when facing them. Downside is the rank up summary that happens every time Talion dies, which can take a while if you play it safe or well. And anytime you come across a captain, they introduce themselves with a small speech, sometimes while you're in the middle of fighting a horde. So that breaks the gameplay flow somewhat, and it can be annoying as well. I even had a situation close to the end where I fought multiple captains and the game slowed down every few seconds to show me that one of them died. That's nice of you, game, but it led to me getting hit not just once because I was distracted. And the game works a lot with slow motion, which in most of the cases is just as unnecessary. The Nemesis system, however, is something that we aren't going to see in the near future because the developers knew that they had something special at hand and Warner Bros. Patented it. Since the closure of Monolith, they haven't done anything with it, which is a shame. So you see that I didn't have the best of times playing Shadow of Mordor, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad game. It's just dated, and a lot of things that worked 12 years ago are overdone nowadays. But maybe the second game is more to my taste. Shadow of War starts off pretty much immediately after Shadow of Mordor. There's just a small time skip. Talion and the Wraith, who during the course of the first game turns out to be Celebrimbor, the elf who forged the Rings of Power, make a new ring to defeat Sauron and the Witch King. Celebrimbor pours his very essence into that ring, so when he is captured at the start, he is not powerless but greatly weakened. The two are helped by Shelob. Yes, that Shelob. The big spider that in the books is described to eat its offspring after mating with it, the one that captures Frodo on his way to Mount Doom. In Shadow of War, she is a shapeshifter who can turn into a human with clairvoyant abilities and wants to help topple Sauron. Yeah, it's better not to expect a lore-accurate story. At least the way I know the Lord of the Rings universe. This has been the case with the first game as well, but here it becomes very obvious that it is an all-original story. Don't get me wrong, I'm completely fine with lore changes. I mean, it's a fantasy universe, people can do whatever the hell they want with it, as long as it's good. Sorry, I don't know what that was. But I'm really not sure if Mummy Shelob is something I needed in my life. The story of the second game offers a few twists and turns that you could see coming if you paid attention to them, but it's a lot better than the one in the first game. That is partly due to the characters, who are still very cliché, but offer a variety that Shadow of Mordor didn't have. Each of them also has their own questline, which makes exploring the content the game offers slightly more rewarding. I, however, realized pretty quickly that it was probably a mistake to play the two games back to back, as Shadow of Mordor's weaknesses were still very fresh, and the sequel builds very heavily on its foundation. And really quick before I move on, this game uses two kinds of shots during cutscenes that bother me for some reason, not just in video games but also in movies. First, the one when a mostly female character walks around the mostly male character while talking to them, most of the time to talk down on them. And second, when the protagonist walks towards the camera while another one shouts after him. They are very overused, and who the hell talks like that? And this game came out when Marvel movies were still considered good, so there's a lot of Marvel-like humor built in. I don't mind it, but when the game pauses in the middle of a fight to make some snarky comments and open a tutorial menu, I get mad. Just a quick rant, let's get back to the actual game. What it does is take everything its predecessor did and crank it to the max. It is wild at times, and that makes it exciting. So now you have double jumps and amazing set pieces that are sadly paired with boss fights that often come across a bit lackluster. And if they don't, they can be downright overwhelming because there's so much happening on screen. It is also not as well polished as Shadow of Mordor. I had situations where I fell through the levels or got stuck on invisible walls. A few times the game even crashed. That luckily didn't happen very often, but that the game is still plagued by issues like that after almost 10 years is pretty sad. I also didn't like the graphics. While the first one had a certain grittiness, this one looks almost too clean. Sure, there have been obvious technical advances and the environment is much more detailed, but that comes at the cost of the atmosphere. Talion looks way too hot now, and in my mind, I involuntarily made a comparison between the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies. The core gameplay remains roughly the same, it is still the same combat system, but now there is much more enemy variety. Shadow of Mordor had different types of orcs, standard ones, archers, orcs with shields, and savages that you can't attack without stunning them first. Add to that ghouls, Karagors and Graugs, and that's it. Shadow of War now has Ologs that are some kind of trolls, drakes and spiders added to the repertoire, as well as mounted orcs. Captains still have strengths and weaknesses, but now they can also adapt to your playstyle, which on one hand forces you to switch it up a bit, but also can lead to a captain that has a counter to every kind of attack you can make. That's at least how I experienced it. This can lead to a real slogfest, and when you're in the middle of a huge horde, a complete loss of oversight. They also tend to introduce themselves with not just one little sentence, but whole speeches they cooked up in their little chambers. That's handy, so I can do other stuff while they are talking about themselves, because you can't skip it.
I know what it is to return from death. I laid in its cold grasp on the battlefield until a squirming, wriggling warmth took over me. 1,000 pulsing maggots crawled over and into me, scouring the dead flesh from my ragged wounds. Now they are with me, always, a churning, writhing horde of torment. Enough neck flapping! Time to die!
Enemies spawn endlessly, which can lead to you being surrounded constantly, and there is also a mechanic that can strengthen your enemies through war banners. So let me describe the worst case scenario to you. You track the captain and want to face him. He is alone. Very good. But then the minions start to spawn. The orc has the ability to call a banner bearer that makes attacks unblockable, a drake swoops in and aggroes on Talion, a second, maybe third captain appears out of nowhere, and you're busy jumping around while some enemies don't let you and push you back. Maybe the captain even retreats and despawns later and you're not able to follow him because you're constantly bothered by the remaining dudes, or Talion sticks to every surface while following him. Sounds real fun, doesn't it? The game is incredibly chaotic, and while it can be fun initially, it is very irritating the longer it goes on. Fights could be a bit shorter, and I wouldn't mind, that is what I'm trying to say. There are also new status effects like Poisoned, which was already in Shadow of Mordor, but here it's slightly changed. Cursed or Dazed. The open world is much bigger, which can lead to problems because it is divided into areas, and once the whole map is available, there are 6 of them. And you do the same thing over and over again. Go to an area, fight through the ranks of orcs until you have weakened the defenses of the fortress, and capture it. That is the newest mechanic. You are now supposed to capture every fortress in Mordor. And once you've done that, there is no guarantee you made it, because your orcs can betray you now, leading to fortresses being lost. And here's the funny part. Someone can come along through the new online features and take the fortress away from you. I love online PvP aspects in single-player games. Alright, I don't. Luckily this didn't happen to me because no one was really playing the game, but I don't want to know what it was like when it first released. It also had the bane of the middle 2010s included. Yes, it had loot boxes. Those were patched out, thank God, but from what I gathered you would have only been able to, for example, move your captains from one region to another if you got the right boxes. This was just the beginning of the games as a service hellscape we live in now. It is not enough that games cost 70 or, if we're lucky, soon 80 euros each. They have to be kept alive so that publishers can squeeze every available penny out of their audience. But that is a topic for another video. Maybe leave a comment if you're interested in something like that. I maybe want to do some more in-depth videos apart from the ones where I focus on specific games. So in Shadow of War there is a bigger open world, which means you need something to fill it with. And how do you do that? Of course you add more minigames! Because that's what the players want. Not more side quests with compelling characters, but now I have to work for my map being filled with icons. Or focus on tracks. Or focus on runes. I'm not being fair, I know, because I already said that there are more side quests, but there are some activities the game doesn't need. It's the old tale of, if you don't know how to fill your world, just make it smaller. I even ignored a whole area because it was not necessary to complete it. So I didn't. The areas offer a bit of variety, even though it's limited to the classics. There is a green woodland area, a desert, and snowy mountains. Everything in between is similar to the first game, dark and bleak Mordor. And there is an area with volcanic rock and lava. I guess you can figure out which region that is. So, as you can probably tell if you didn't just have this video in the background, I didn't exactly like playing the Middle-earth games. Again, that doesn't mean that they're bad games, especially when they came out. Their biggest problem is the fact that those kinds of games have taken over the open world genre by now, and you've seen it all before and plentiful, except for the Nemesis system, which still feels very unique and fresh, and I hope it stays that way, even when we inevitably get new games trying to implement it. I guess I need to take a break from open world action games for a while. I feel like I can't enjoy them anymore the way I used to. For now, please try and be civil about it in the comments, and I will see you next time, if you want.